and you can check here. Just
Oh, yeah.
I,
Okay, can you hear me now?
yes, Praji, we are able to hear you.
Good. Is it loud enough?
Yeah, yes, Praji, you are loud
All right,
enough.
good.
Hare Krishna. So today we are very fortunate and honored to have association of His Grace Tamohar Krishna, Tamohar Prabhuji. I will just give a brief introduction about Prabhuji. Tamohar Prabhu has a doctorate in educational psychology and has been a faculty member and administrator in several graduate schools, including Dean of Illinois School of Professional Psychology. Tamohar Prabhu and his good wife, Matrini Devi Dasi, first saw the Hare Krishna devotees chanting at a rock festival, after which they were inspired to purchase Bhagavad Gita as it is, the Radha Krishna temple album, Krishna posters, and incense at the local bookstore. And they joined ISKCON's Chicago temple in 1972 and were initiated by Srila Prabhupada 9 months later. Prabhuji has been involved in ISKCON leadership for many years and has taken so many responsibility. Uh, he is currently general responsibility in the South East United States, including Alachua, New Vrindavan, Atlanta, and other temples. And Pro has many years of experience in counseling devotees, and he regularly conducts the seminar on Grahastha life, child protection, communication, and leadership training. And Pro and his wife currently resides in Alachua, Florida, with their children and grandchildren. So today we are very fortunate to have Prabhuji's association. We are going to hear various pastimes from Srila Prabhupada life and our dear Guru Maharaj also. So we welcome Prabhu by loudly chanting one time Hare Krishna Mahamantra. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare
Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama.
Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna.
Okay. Hare
Yes.
Krishna. Thank you so much for your very kind introduction. Probably exaggerated somewhat my accomplishments. Actually, just to make one small correction, I'm no longer on the GBC. I was a GBC member for 12, 13 years, and just last year I retired from that. So I'm no longer doing that, but I still have some management responsibilities in Alachua and other things. But of course, now it's gives me a little more time to do other things, and I hope I'm able to continue to serve Srila Prabhupada in some way. I want to first offer my deepest heartfelt condolences to the disciples and the followers, or aspiring followers and disciples of His Grace, His Divine Grace, Bhakti Taru Maharaj. Of course, recently I've had many God brothers and God sisters depart from this world. But I can't remember one recently that's affected me as much as Bhakti Taru Swami's departure. Of course, he was here in Florida, a couple hours away from where we are in Alachua, and he had visited here a few times. And so we had nice association. He was cultivating several aspiring disciples in Tampa, Florida, as well as here. And so he was very much beloved by all of us here. I was fortunate to be able to work with Maharaj for about 12 years on the GBC, so we saw each other for a few weeks every year. And my first impression with him is the same impression that I always had, the impression I had to this day. And that impression of him never changed, and I'm sure it's something you've heard from many, many of the exalted speakers that have been doing this program with you. I saw the list of them. I feel a little bit humbled after seeing all the sannyasis and gurus and GBC members who have been speaking with you. But my impression was that this was a very advanced devotee, someone who was incredibly sincere, dedicated. He was a great gentleman, of course. His manners and his way of acting as a Vaishnava were impeccable. So everybody learned from him. I mean, he was a great inspiration in that. He was also a friend. And I felt he was my friend. I'm sure hundreds of thousands of other devotees also felt he was their friend, because it's not that I had such a deep, close relationship with him, but he was such a well-wisher and kind person. He was kind to everyone. So I think we all felt he was our dear friend, and we all felt the loss. I'm sure you've heard this many times by other speakers, because Bhakti Churu Swami was one of those people who, when you got to know him and you dealt with him personally, there wasn't any difference. When we talk about Srila Prabhupada like this way, there's no difference between personal life and private life. He is what you see. And that's how Maharaj was, pretty unchanging. I mean, whatever you saw of him was what he was like. And that spiritual advancement, his deep understanding of philosophy, that just came through all the time. Of course, he was a great devotee and dear, dear disciple of Srila Prabhupada. And that's anyone who's dear to Srila Prabhupada is just naturally, automatically dear to all of us. We know that he spent a lot of time with Srila Prabhupada, probably personally taught him how to cook, I think. And I think he gave him like all the initiations, practically within a very short period of time, just upon meeting him, which Srila Prabhupada recognized here as a very exceptional soul. I asked Bhakti Churu Swami, he says, is it true you got first, second sannyas all the same time right after you met Prabhupada? He says, no, there was some time. I found out later that some time was 2 or 3 months. It was a very short time period when Prabhupada gave him all the initiations up to sannyas. So Prabhupada could see, here's an exceptional disciple, here's an exceptional person, and he can do great things for this movement. And of course he did. His preaching has made hundreds and thousands of devotees. I don't know how many disciples Maharaj had. I'm sure it's in the several thousand. Excuse me a minute. I forgot to turn off my telephone. At any rate, he was a very intimate disciple. And in Prabhupada's last days, of course, he cared for him very much, gave him, personal service, personal caring of Srila Prabhupada. And he got a lot of instruction from Srila Prabhupada, and some of the final instructions, in fact. I believe that at least one of the times when Prabhupada made one of his very famous statements, it was to Bhakti Churu Maharaj when he said, you will show your love for me, by how you all cooperate together to push on this movement. He may have said that to I know he said that to Maharaj, definitely. Another very interesting thing that I heard him say in class, and I asked him twice, on 2 different occasions, I asked him just to verify, to confirm what he said, that Prabhupada said, Varnashram is for the outsiders, not the devotees. Now, this struck me a little bit because we all know how Prabhupada was pushing Varnashram, wanting that, think this is necessary for society to run in a godly way, for people to make spiritual advancement through the Varnashram system. But this is in one of the last couple weeks of Prabhupada's life, when Bhakti Churu Swami was talking to him intimately about many subjects, and the subject of Varnashram came up, and Prabhupada just said, yes, Varnashram is important. He said, but it is for the outsiders, not for the devotees. And I think that's an important thing to always remember, to keep the balance here, that deep understanding that we are primarily Vaishnavas. We are not our body, we are not our Varna, we are not our ashram. We are devotees of the Lord first and foremost, and I think Srila Prabhupada wanted to make sure that that was understood. So, although he had so many disciples, Bhakti Churu Swami always carried himself as just a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. He never acted like he was one of the big gurus, although he was, obviously. He considered himself servant of Prabhupada and also servant of the devotees. He always kept this mood. He was very concerned about devotees. He was concerned about relationships. He was concerned that people got along, that they cared about one another, that we have loving relationships with each other. I remember one time there were some issues, in terms of material management, there's always going to be differences of opinion. And on the GBC, there are a lot of differences of opinion. I know there was one management issue where I think we disagreed on something. And later, Bhakti Churu Swami sought me out, and we had lunch together or something. And he just wanted to make sure everything was all right in our relationship. I said, well, of course it is. I don't even remember what the issue is now. It wasn't even very important anymore. I said, yes, of course, Maharaj. Thank you so much for, for your kindness and, bringing this up. And so, he was always like that, concerned about loving relationships and dealings, sadhu sangha first, before management second. I also remember in Mayapur at the meetings, one of the highlights always was to be invited to lunch by Maharaj. And those of you who have know what his lunches were like. It wasn't like, okay, here's a sabji and chapati or something. It was always several courses. He has of course, as you all know, some of you may even have cooked for Maharaj. He had wonderful cooks he's a wonderful cook himself, and he had wonderful cooks among his disciples. And so the prasadam was always really, really nice, and we always enjoyed it. And he invited all sorts of people. It wasn't he just invited I always thought of myself as a kind of a newcomer. I was a newer GBC. I wasn't a sannyasi. I wasn't a guru. So, I didn't think I was really up there or anything in the standings for whatever that's worth. But Bhakti Swami invited all of us at different times. He'd invite women, he'd invite householders, he'd invite sannyasis. We'd be all together being served so nicely by him too, and by his disciples. He was a perfect gentleman. He understood Vaishnava etiquette better than almost all of us. I mean, those of us in the West, we don't understand at all. This is all new to us. But he obviously was a very refined person. He learned this probably from an early age, and certainly been enforced and increased by his association with Srila Prabhupada. So he knew what to serve at, all the right times, how to treat guests, and when to, so it was a wonderful experience. It wasn't just having lunch. It was a lesson in Vaishnava etiquette, always for Bhakti Swami. And of course he had, nice facility and nice prasadam. So that was something we always enjoyed. I can't remember, you all remember, I'm sure, 4 years ago, when we all came to Ujjain for the GBC meeting, when it was first proposed, some of us who had never been to your wonderful place were skeptical. I know I was. Ujjain, where is that? Out in the middle of nowhere? I mean, it's hard to even get to. You have to fly into, can't even remember the city, somewhere in Madrid. So in other words, we were, I'm sorry, Indore.
Indore.
So what is it? Indore, right?
It's Indore.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then we had to drive a long way. And of course, once we got there, everything changed in any feelings or apprehension. I think when we were at Ujjain, it was one of the best GBC meetings we ever had, honestly, in terms of facility, and just everything was wonderful. The guest house was wonderful. The prasadam was wonderful. The devotees were so nice, and the service was so nice. And that's a credit to Maharaj. They say sometimes you can judge a guru by his disciples. Well, you all in Ujjain represented your spiritual master so well, because everyone was completely satisfied. Great meeting, wonderful service. Everything was very nice, and we would happily come again. Plus, I didn't realize that Ujjain had so many wonderful spiritual attractions. Going to the Sanipani Muni's place, where Krishna and Balaram, were instructed, and where they went to Gurukula. That's one of the nicest places I've been to. It's one of my highlights of going to different places in India. And of course, Bhakti Swami kind of made this all happen. He obviously is the founder of Ujjain, beautiful, but to speak of the beautiful temple and the deities, so everything was so nice. And it's just typical. It just exemplifies what he was like and how he did things. He was always very expert. He was very knowledgeable. Philosophically, he knew all the Shastra, knew the verses. He also was really expert at Gaudiya Vaishnava history. Anything you talk about, and we say, oh yes, I know that place and this person, and that was this line, and those, Vaishnavas were there, and this is how it happened. Very, very familiar with our history, which I think is great. I love to hear about past acharyas and the history and how these things all happened. And I think that was demonstrated in the Abhicharan video, the movie that he produced and sometimes directed and sometimes wrote, many, many years ago. I had never actually had a chance to see it all the way through, but while we were all sort of quarantined, or basically, I know you have a lot of difficulty in India right now, and COVID is really strong in many places. Well, it is here too. Florida is one of the epicenters, as they say, one of the worst places. So we had a lot of time on our hands. The temple was basically closed for some time. And so my wife and I sat and watched the whole thing, whatever it is, 20 hours or something. And it was just wonderful. I enjoyed it so much. And I could see the devotion he put into it. And, I learned a lot about Bhaktisiddhanta, Bhakti Vinod, things like that, and about Srila Prabhupada's father. In other words, it helped bring us all, not just, obviously, appreciation of Srila Prabhupada, that was the main thing, but it also brought us closer to our roots of understanding our history and the past generations of Vaishnavism that all influenced Prabhupada and helped him do what he did. So that was very nice. The last thing I'm going to say about Maharaj is when he came to do the DeLand project in Florida, of course, he was here a lot more. DeLand is about, 3-hour drive by car from where we are in Alachua. So he visited a few times, and he also came to Tampa and other places, as I mentioned. And there were some aspiring disciples. If he would have stayed, on this planet, on this earth, he would have had many disciples here in Florida because, he was very beloved by people. And I was able to have some association with him actually just before coronavirus sort of shut everything down and nobody could travel. It must have been January, February. Anyway, the last time that Maharaj came to Alachua, he stayed at a wonderful devotee named Prabir, who's a medical doctor, and he has a very nice facility. And he and his wife, Sri Garangi, took care of them, put them up while he came, a couple different visits. Anyway, the last time he came, I was invited to lunch with a few other devotees like Shesha Prabhu and who else? Ambarish, some Ranjit, I think, were there. And and then for some reason, he stayed another day or whatever, and we all did it again. We had a second time where we had, 2 very, very nice long lunches in a row with Maharaj. And it was so sweet. I was enjoying his association so much. And, we talked about all kinds of things. And, he talked about, his history a little bit and things that, just everything that you talked about, with a devotee friend. Of course, he's in a very special place as a very senior, but still as a friend. And I felt that friendship and relationship growing. I was sitting next to Maharaj at lunch one of these last days, and he said to me, he says, Tamahara, he says, all the time we were on the GBC together, it was always business. He said, this is so nice, just being able to associate as friends and God brothers and devotees, as Vaishnavas, and enjoy this company. And I felt the same way. And that's part of my sorrow and part of my missing Maharaj is knowing that a growing and developing wonderful friendship that I felt we would have had. Now, I'm not comparing that with the sorrow that the disciples feel. I'm sure that's far, far greater. But I certainly appreciate Maharaj and what he did and what he brought to all of us. And, that's a very real thing. And I think you all saw a lot of the condolences and really an outpouring of sympathy. All the leaders that I know, all the GBC people, had, such respect and love for Bhakti Charu Maharaj that it's quite a astounding thing, really. So anyway, this is very difficult. It's a very difficult time when one loses one's guru, when one's guru departs, even though we know that we all have to leave at a certain point. And of course, many of them, the Prabhupada disciples, were all older. We see it can happen, but it's still very, very difficult. Now, I guess, I'm sure you've heard from many Srila Prabhupada disciples over the last month who've been doing these classes. And I'm sure many people have said this to you, but we do understand a little bit what you're going through because we all experienced the departure of Srila Prabhupada. And that was very painful, very difficult. Personally, I felt, and while many of us felt the same, that Srila Prabhupada would never leave. We just thought he'd be with us forever, even when he was very, very sick. So even though it's like if we would logically thought about it, we could say, okay, he's very sick, he's probably going to leave his body. It still was a shock when it actually happened. And so in one sense, like Srila Prabhupada spoke about in his very wonderful lecture on the disappearance of his guru, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj, he talked about how Krishna and the devotees coming is like the rising and setting of the sun, how, it's not, the sun is never lost, it's just in a different place. And so he said, this Nitya Leela is always going on. He was talking about his guru, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj. And he said, so we have nothing to lament for disappearance. Now, we do not lament in the material sense, it's true. We understand philosophically, that our spiritual master is whatever he's doing with Prabhupada and with, people say this a lot, oh, he went back to Godhead, this and that. And, sometimes I'm a little skeptical, and people say, oh, everybody they say went back to Godhead, because it's not that easy of a thing. It's quite a thing to go back to God. I personally, for what it's worth, which I'm personally convinced 100% that Bhakti True Swami absolutely went back to Godhead, went back with Prabhupada, and he's serving Prabhupada and Krishna in some other capacity at this point. I'm sure of it, But although we have nothing to lament, and we see, okay, our guru has just gone on to more glorious service, it's very natural to feel some sadness, to feel separation when the spiritual master leaves us. When Prabhupada left, many of us felt despair, devastation. It was like, how could we possibly go on? What could we do now? So that difficulty was there, along with kind of the shock and disbelief. But we did carry on, most of us. Most of the Prabhupada disciples carried on somehow. And I think that we were able to continue because of one very important realization. And that realization is that Prabhupada was then, he is today, and he always will be with us. Prabhupada is always with us. He's in our hearts. Prabhupada said, he said, I'm in my books, and he is. When we read his books, we get realization, we actually get the mercy of Prabhupada. And many of us feel Prabhupada's presence just as deeply, maybe even more deeply, than when he was physically with us on this earth. Now, many of us, like myself, didn't have a whole lot of association with Srila Prabhupada. I came in 72, and by that point, there was quite a few temples, and Prabhupada traveled a lot. And except for his sort of close entourage, most of us didn't get that much association. I saw Prabhupada, maybe eight different times, different places for a few days here and there, which was nice. And I'm going to say a lot about that, about my experiences with Srila Prabhupada. But it wasn't that we had, every day that we were with him. So we had sort of learned to serve in separation already to some degree, because we were doing our service, even though we weren't getting, day-to-day orders from Srila Prabhupada or instructions. We knew basically what he wanted. We knew the basic philosophy. We read his books. We knew what he wanted. His disciples, the senior disciples, instructed us as more junior disciples. So everything went on. And when Prabhupada left, he left the same temples, the same devotees were there, the same books were there, the same philosophy was there. Prabhupada left everything. And we understood, although it was hard, that he had given us everything we needed. Right? And your spiritual master, Bhakti True Maharaj, His Holiness, has given you everything you need to advance in Krishna consciousness. Right? And most importantly, you need to hold on to two things. And this is something that Bhakti True Maharaj emphasized a lot. You need to hold on to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada as the founder Acharya, as the Shiksha Guru, the instructing Guru for everyone in ISKCON. And hold on to the association of devotees, and particularly this ISKCON society. And I know those are things that Maharaj emphasized a lot. I remember one of the first initiation lectures I heard from him, he was saying to his new disciples, you're not just my disciple, you're a disciple of this ISKCON society, of this whole family, of the whole lineage from Srila Prabhupada. You're connected to all of that. He emphasized that many, many times. When we had our memorial here in Alachua a few days after Maharaj departed, two different devotees, one disciple and one aspiring disciple who had recent contact with him and and talked with him. Both of them said their last instruction by Bhakti True Maharaj was, do not leave ISKCON. Do not leave ISKCON. Always stay in association with the devotees of Srila Prabhupada and Srila Prabhupada's movement. So what do you do now? To please your spiritual master, to please Bhakti True Swami, you stay fixed in this ISKCON society. You stay fixed in your understanding and love for Srila Prabhupada and his instructions, and for the association of all of his devotees. And that's what we all do. We all take shelter of Prabhupada. We take shelter of the devotees. And you also, of course, take shelter of Bhakti True Swami, who will be with you as you continue on your spiritual path. By the way, I just saw posted on one of the conferences that I just saw posted on one of the conferences the GBC had just written up and posted a letter to the disciples of Bhakti True Maharaj. Have some of you seen that? I don't know if anyone's seen that yet. It was just posted, I think, yesterday or today. Yeah. If I have a little time, I'm going to just read a couple paragraphs from that. This was just posted, and it's written to all the disciples. It's kind of long, but here's what it says. Please remember that Maharaj dedicated his life to teaching you. Take shelter of Srila Prabhupada's association through his books and followers. Commit yourself to serving the mission of Srila Prabhupada and his ISKCON society. Chant the holy names with faith and attention every day. Be exemplary in your spiritual practices and behavior. Find opportunities to share the gifts of Krishna consciousness with others. By remaining faithful to these instructions, you will find your connection with Maharaj and Srila Prabhupada deepen and become more personal than ever. We share this from our own experience of service and separation, as we did with Srila Prabhupada. You may have questions and concerns as you continue on your spiritual journey. In service of Bhakti True Maharaj, the members of the GBC body and other leaders of ISKCON are committed to supporting you and being available to assisting you in your spiritual endeavors. So, our GBC is very concerned with the disciples of Bhakti Maharaj and really imploring you, stay connected with the devotees, stay connected with ISKCON, to the senior leaders, to anyone who can assist you. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about Srila Prabhupada now and some of my personal memories with him. By the way, how long does this go? Can someone tell me how much time we have?
Yeah, Prabhuji, we can go for another 30 minutes.
Oh, okay. All right, so we have time. About 2 years ago, Siddhanta Prabhu, who does all the memory tapes of Srila Prabhupada, I'm sure many of you have seen those. They're really wonderful. Different memories of disciples of Srila Prabhupada in his presence, different things that they've remembered, realizations they had, etc. And here's kind of a standard question. I see he asked a lot in the beginning. He said, what was your strongest impression of Srila Prabhupada? And my answer was the feeling of complete fearlessness in his presence. That was such a strong impression for me. When you were with Srila Prabhupada, like nothing else mattered. You were completely safe and protected. It's like you were almost like you were in your constitutional position. You were where you should be at the lotus feet of Srila Prabhupada, and everything was okay. There were no problems, right? I experienced this. The first time seeing Srila Prabhupada was in New Vrindavan in 1972. It's a long story, which I don't think I'll get into, but basically my wife and I were looking for spiritual master. We were looking for a spiritual path. We were reading and studying all sorts of things. We started to study and get books about the Hare Krishna movement, and we were very attracted to it. So we drove all the way to the west coast of the country, a place called Seattle. And there's a small temple there, and we got some japa beads. We were learning to chant. And they said there, well, we don't really have any room for householders. Most of the householders go to our farm communities. Of course, there was only one in New Vrindavan, and that's in West Virginia. So we turned around and drove 2,000 miles back all the way to West Virginia, finally found a place way up in the hills, walked into this big little, small, it was a farmhouse converted to a temple, into this little living room, now a temple. filled with devotees, and everyone saying, he's coming, he's coming. Who's coming? It was Srila Prabhupada. We had no idea Srila Prabhupada was there, but Krishna led us to his lotus feet. So we sat down with the other devotees, and Srila Prabhupada, well, first there was Artik, and then Srila Prabhupada, this was in the evening, gave Bhagavad Gita class. And it was very, very wonderful. He gave class there for a few nights where we stayed. And I didn't understand everything he said because, his accent was kind of difficult when you first get used to it. And of course, I didn't know all the philosophy. So even though not fully understanding everything Srila Prabhupada said, at that moment, we were absolutely convinced. My wife and I sort of looked at each other and said, this is it. This is our spiritual master. We're finished with the journey. So then we decided, we joined and became devotees at that point. We actually joined in Chicago. I joined by the same time. Some of you know Basu Ghosh, I think he spoke here from, where is he now? He's in, not Ahmedabad, but anyway, Gujarat somewhere. And we joined about the same time. He was there too. He was Bhakti Brian, I was Bhakti Tom. So anyway, and Yasomati Nanda Prabhu was there. Some of you know these devotees that were now in India. Anyway, that was the thing about Srila Prabhupada. It's like you just became convinced just in his presence, and whatever he said, it was like perfect. It's like he knew, and you knew when you saw him, here was someone who would not cheat you, who had no external motivations. His only interest was to give Krishna consciousness and to help you to become a devotee. So, and that was an experience that I had every time I saw Srila Prabhupada. He dispelled all of our fears. He eradicated our ignorance. And I had several times when I was enough with Srila Prabhupada where I could have spoken to you, asked questions like that. I never asked Prabhupada a question. Now, in retrospect, years later, it seemed kind of foolish. Why didn't I ask anything that I wanted to ask? Because when you're with Srila Prabhupada, you felt like, what do you need to ask? It's like, everything was perfect. You knew the basic philosophy. Srila Prabhupada was there. Everything was all right. What's the question? The only question is, can we fulfill his instructions? Can we follow? So I never really asked Prabhupada questions. I'll tell some of my other personal experiences here, though. I'll just kind of go through these rather quickly. It kind of just gives some little snippets of different times when I saw Srila Prabhupada and kind of put them in a few categories of sort of how I look at them. One thing about Srila Prabhupada is he was always challenging us for greater results, like he would with book distribution, so many things, always to do more, always to increase. Prabhupada was never satisfied with just a little bit. He wanted this movement to grow and expand unlimitedly. And he was never fooled. That was another interesting thing. You could not put one over on Srila Prabhupada. Although devotees sometimes tried, just to look good. They always wanted to please Prabhupada. When Prabhupada came to Miami, we hadn't been distributing many books, to be honest. And the month before Srila Prabhupada came, we ordered 10,000 Back to Godheads, and we were distributing the Back to Godheads profusely then. So when Srila Prabhupada came, he said, how are my books being distributed? And the Temple Brother said, we're distributing 10,000 Back to Godheads this month. And he says, oh, and what about my big books? No answer. Well, in other words, he actually, he knew that we weren't really distributing that much, and we weren't doing any big books, so that was a concern to him. Another little small incident was funny because where the temple was it was in Coconut Grove. This is in Miami, and it's really basically a coral reef. I mean, it's pretty, things don't grow real well. There's a little bit of topsoil on top of coral. That's what Miami area is. So anyway, in the backyard there, in the house where I was staying, it was pretty much bare dirt. The devotees didn't really particularly try to grow grass there. And so thinking it wouldn't look so good, they raked leaves all over it. Thought that looked better than bare dirt. And so when Prabhupada came, he's sitting down at the porch looking at the yard, and he says, how come the leaves haven't been raked? And Prabhupada said, and they say, oh, well, there's just dirt underneath, and we can't grow grass. So Prabhupada looks down the street, looks at the grass in all the neighbors' lawns, up and down. He says, How come they're always all growing grass and you cannot? So, it was like that. You try to like fool Srila Prabhupada about something you hadn't really done very well, and Prabhupada would see right through it. He was also very attentive to detail, and he wanted us to manage carefully. We know the stories, the famous stories of how he kept a little notebook and he recorded like 7 cents for this and every penny that was spent. Very attentive like that. He always wanted to make sure that Krishna's energy was used properly in his service. When I was at the Washington, D.C. temple in 1976, Srila Prabhupada was going to come. And it was a fairly new temple, so there was a lot of work to do. And this was frequent. In most temples I was at, when Srila Prabhupada was going to come, all of a sudden there was so much activity, construction, painting, everybody wanted to make it nice, of course, for Srila Prabhupada to please him. That's natural. So one thing that we didn't have a lot of money, but the temple president bought these chandeliers for the new temple room, or the temple room we were fixing up, new curtains and things like that. And so he bought these really nice chandeliers, big chandeliers in the temple. One of the first things Prabhupada did when he came into the temple room, he said, "How much did those chandeliers cost?" And he said, "Oh, about $5,000. And I remember this 1972, $5,000 American, a lot of money. Prabhupada looked at him and said, "Be very careful how you spend Krishna's money." A little lesson there. In other words, don't be too extravagant. If you don't have a lot, you don't have to over-decorate. You need to be very careful. And then as far as detail, he had an eye for detail that was uncanny. He walked out of the temple room one day or evening here in Washington. It was in the Potomac, Washington area temple. He looked up at a transformer, an electrical transformer, where the electrical lines run through and the electricity is distributed from. And there was a little red light up there blinking, like 60 feet away. Prabhupada said, "Why is that red light blinking?" We had no idea. He says, "You should find out." So, of course, things went on and we were busy and Timothy Srila Prabhupada, and no one thought about the red light again. Well, that was July. So a month later is Janmashtami, right? We have a big Janmashtami celebration, and we're stringing lights everywhere and, using a lot of electricity. And what happens? The transformer blows up. So somehow Prabhupada knew there was going to be some problem with that. He was like, had this ability to know past, present, and future. They say the devotees Trikalagya, like that. Anyway, another example is he was very concerned about plumbing, and we remodeled a bathroom and where he was going to be staying. It was all new, at least remodeled, from an older house. And so one thing he did, the first thing he did was apparently the last place he'd come, I don't know where it was from, the last temple he was at, the toilet didn't work properly. So he said, "Get me some chapati dough." So they brought some chapati dough. He rolls it in a little ball, puts it in the toilet and flushes it. And it worked, okay? He wanted to make sure the toilet was working. And, we're thinking, "Oh, everything's new here. No problem, Srila Prabhupada." So one thing that happened, Prabhupada fortunately wasn't in the bathroom, but these glass shower doors, it fell out and smashed on the floor. Fortunately, Prabhupada wasn't there then. So it's like, yes, we should pay attention. He was trying to say there might be something wrong here, and there was. So that's the way he was. He also provided like new insight and enlivenment. A lot of things he would do and say were unpredictable. He wouldn't be just like, well, he always says this, and this is going to be his answer, stock answer. It's not like that. Prabhupada responded to time and circumstance, to the person, to what the person needed to hear in a spiritual life. So some examples of that. Prabhupada, and when he was in Potomac, he had a darshan. I was in that darshan, and he invited all the scientists. Swarup Damodar Maharaj later, he was brahmachari then, I think Sadhuputta, Madhav. Anyway, the different leading Bhaktivedanta Institute scientists were there. And they were, on his instruction, working hard, and they were going to produce a book. I think it later became Life Comes from Life. I think it was years later that it actually got printed. But that's what they were working on, this theory of life comes from life. And so at one point, Swarup Damodar Brahmachari Maharaj later, was talking about living things as opposed to inanimate objects. He said, just like there's the spirit soul in animals and plants and people, and inanimate objects, like rocks or stones, do not have souls. And Prabhupada goes, oh, sometimes they do. And everyone's kind of stunned. We never heard this before. This was new to us. A lot of times when Prabhupada speaks, something he would say we had never heard. It was new. He said, and he talked about, he said, mountains. He says, because Sri Governor was saying that living things go through the stages of birth. They stay for some time, they grow, they have byproducts, they dwindle, they die. They go through the stages of the body that the spirit soul's in. So he said, mountains, they grow, they shrink, like that. And they go, oh, really? And then someone said, what about crystals? He goes, yes. Prabhupada says, crystals grow, they're alive. They're alive. Gemstones and crystals, they're alive. And then so someone said, well, you mean like all these rocks out here, they're all alive? Prabhupada says, no, they're dead. So what do you? So they're trying to understand. And he said, look, it's like in a forest, there's a tree. It's growing, it's alive. It falls down and it dies. And the log that's remaining, that's the dead body. It's just like that. It kind of all finally came together. It made sense. In other words, most stones and rocks, are not alive right now, but they may have been at one point, and they were produced, and there they are. So it's kind of like they had to go back to the drawing board and rewrite, some of the what they were talking about, because Prabhupada would give us new instruction and new insights just about the nature of the universe that we didn't know. Here's a couple of quick ones. He was in Miami when I was in there in 1974. And one thing he said to us is, all of you have come because of prasadam. That was very interesting. He turned to the temple president, who was very intellectual, very, probably understood the philosophy very well. He says, even you have come because of prasadam. So he's telling us the power of prasadam, was there. Another thing about following the principles. There was this one young man who came, I don't know if he was staying in the temple, but he'd been visiting. And he was obviously a bit mentally disturbed. We got a few like that in those days. And so he kind of like says to Prabhupada, almost in a challenging way, when they were asking for questions, he said, Prabhupada, or I don't know if he even said Prabhupada, he said, why do we have to follow the principles? And Prabhupada said in a voice that was like a lion roaring that knocked him back practically, physically. He says, to keep you from going to hell. And he was just stunned. And everyone went, Jai Prabhupada, In other words, he knew, he knows who he's talking to. Here was a person who didn't want to follow the principles, and Prabhupada was going to tell him emphatically that, you do, or you're bound to go to hell again. So a couple other little things. And one of the morning walks in Miami, we went out to one of the beaches. And I was there, and one of the devotees who had a very strong Christian background, and he was always a little bit conflicted about it because he was still attracted to Christianity. And he said, is Jesus an incarnation of Lord Brahma? And Prabhupada mumbled something. He wasn't very pleased with the question. None of us heard what he said, but Shri Tirthi was his secretary, his servant, and he was right there. And later we said, what did Prabhupada say? He said, maybe. Again, unpredictable. What did that mean? Not sure. When he was in Potomac in DC again, it was the 10th anniversary of ISKCON. ISKCON was incorporated in 1966. You may remember we celebrated the 50th incorporation a couple of years ago. In 1976 was the 10th anniversary of ISKCON. So we made a big cake for Prabhupada. And they brought it up to him, and he handed Prabhupada a knife to cut the cake and to serve the first piece. Now, some of you who are in India may wonder, why did we do that? And so did Prabhupada, because that's an American custom or a Western custom, that the host or the person of honor, like if it's your birthday and you're the person being honored, you would cut the first piece and then someone else takes over. Now, I don't think this is a custom in India. Prabhupada certainly wasn't familiar with it. And so he's looking at it, and I says, kind of like, well, what? And someone says, oh, you're supposed to cut the first piece. He goes, okay. So Prabhupada would do that. He would just cooperate. Okay, you do it. He'd go along with us, and someone else did the rest. And so he was very accommodating like that. I mean, sometimes, people would offer him different things, of clothing like that, and he would accept them. Sometimes he'd wear things that really probably weren't that nice, but because Prabhupada would accept what his disciples offered to him. He's the little things like he would always be teaching us things like we didn't know. This is one we didn't know. I think they gave him water. I don't know, some fruit, just some fruit. And Prabhupada said you should always give salt with fruit. That was kind of, Americans don't do that so much. That was kind of new we learned that. One last area I want to talk about is how Prabhupada encouraged everybody. Everybody felt enlivened and encouraged around him. Now, a lot of times, especially in later years, he was kind of surrounded by all those, sannyasis and the big leaders. And so the other devotees didn't always get to be so close with him, but he still was able to encourage everyone. And women, children, everybody felt that enthusiasm. In San Francisco, in 1974, they had a big Rath Yatra, and I was fortunate enough to be able to go to that with my family. And some of you may have seen that video where Srila Prabhupada gets down off where he's sitting on the Rath cart and he's jumping up and down kirtan. That was that Rath Yatra. It was very, very nice. And he was giving a Bhagavatam class in the San Francisco temple. And my wife remembers that a child, she had a baby, and the child next to her wasn't even our child, was crying or making some noise or fussing. So they said, all the women children go out, we'll have to leave. And of course, my wife was very disappointed. Here, I can't even hear my spiritual master, speaking, giving class like that. But at the end, Srila Prabhupada always would hand out cookies. You're probably familiar with that. And he would say, bring the children. And so all the sannyasis and big devotees had a part. And the women came up with the children. And he would hand cookies to each child. And when my daughter was about a year and a half old, she wasn't quite getting at what she was supposed to do. So he puts it in her hand, forcefully. And so, of course, it was very, very pleasing for the children and also for the mothers. They all felt that sort of special grace that Prabhupada was giving them. It was very nice. One of my few conversations with Srila Prabhupada, which was not very profound, as you will see, had to do again in Potomac when we had I think in Detroit or somewhere, I can't remember where, my wife had made mango ice cream for Srila Prabhupada, and he really liked it. So we decided to do it again. So I went out and bought the ingredients, and we made the ice cream, and I brought it one night after all the evenings things were done. And there was a lot of devotees there, and a few devotees, and the servants like that. And I came up to a servant, I think it was Harisari Prabhu. I said, I have some ice cream for Prabhupada. And the door was open, and Prabhupada, I could see Prabhupada was right there in the room. And he said he just had ice cream. They sent ice cream from New Vrindavan, from the New Vrindavan cows, devotee cows. They sent it in dry ice. They shipped it, and he just had it. I know, how can I compete with that? Devotee cow milk ice cream. And Prabhupada was kind of listening. He says, what kind is it? What flavor? I said, it's mango, Srila Prabhupada. He goes, oh, bring it. We knew that Prabhupada liked mango ice cream particularly. So, anyway, we gave it to him. It was served out to him. He tasted it and said, this one is the best. You can imagine how pleased we were. He said, this is good. This is better than Bengali ice cream. Now, I don't know I know they make this kulfi or something in Bengali. I asked Bhakti Churu Swami about that once. That's because he was Bengali, and I said, what do you think Prabhupada meant? Because I don't really make ice cream so much. And he said he meant that it was as good as the quality of Bengali sweets. And Bengali sweets are famous. The milk sweets are very good. So it was quite a compliment. And he said, bring it every night. Now, that was an instruction I was very happy to comply with. Certainly, we were happy to bring ice cream to Srila Prabhupada while he was there. So that was very nice. And of course, very nice for my wife too, that it was, to do some little service to please Srila Prabhupada like that. A couple other things with my children, I'll just mention. Once in Miami, most of the devotees, we all went out on Sankirtan. That's what we did back then, mostly. Went out on book distribution at Sankirtan. So most of us were gone during the day. And one day, my 5 or 6-year-old daughter had made she was fairly artistic, actually. So she made a nice picture of Krishna, and she pasted on little sequins and things like that, like children do. So, it was nice, but it was a kid's art. It wasn't anything spectacular. It was a 5-year-old, what they did. And my wife brought my daughter, and they came, and Shruta Kirti was the secretary then. And Shruta Kirti was really, really nice. He always tried to get devotees to see Prabhupada. He's kind of like he was on our side always. And so he said, "Oh, Prabhupada's not doing anything, go on in." Of course, Prabhupada was always doing something important for Krishna. But anyway, so my wife and daughter went in and gave him, he says, "Who is this?" I said, "Oh, this is my daughter, and Ananya." And he looked at it. He looks and he meditates on the picture. And he says, "Very great art, very great art. Thank you." You can imagine how pleasing that was for my daughter and for my wife. Prabhupada was so encouraging. Why was it very great art? Because it was Krishna, of course. Not that it was particularly great art, although it was nice, but because it was something done with some little devotion to Krishna. Prabhupada thought that was great art. In other words, that's the perfection, that it was Krishna. And then at the same, here's my last one. At that same time, I think it's probably like the next day, again, most of us were gone. They were giving Prabhupada, out on Sankirtan, they were giving Prabhupada a tour of the Miami temple. It was under lots of banyan trees, and it's really actually a beautiful place. So they went around, and there weren't that many devotees. There's some of the women and children were there, and my wife was pushing our youngest child, about 1.5 years old, in a stroller, and behind. And my daughter's name, who's Lalita Saki now, was Lalita at the time, she kept looking at Srila Prabhupada because she'd always seen pictures. We'd always shown her pictures that this is Prabhupada, and she kind of knew that was Prabhupada. And in her little childish way, she got it. No, this is really Srila Prabhupada. This is the person they keep telling me in the pictures. Here he is. And so she kept saying, "Prabhupada, Prabhupada," all the time while they were walking around. And so there finally comes to an end. He's, go back to his house, and he starts to go up the stairs, and he turns around and says, "Who is that child calling my name?" So, of course, my wife wasn't going to miss that opportunity. So she holds up our daughter Lalita, and it's just like they stare at each other. They look at each other for a long time. And the way my wife describes it, it's like my little daughter was almost having like symptoms of ecstasy, like her body quivering and just her hands out, like she was just stunned, in an ecstatic moment there with Srila Prabhupada. And finally, he just said, both hands, says, "Thank you very much, Krishna." So that's how Srila Prabhupada was. He pleased everybody. Everybody around him. Didn't matter who you were, a big devotee, little devotee. There were no little devotees. They were all the beloved disciples. The women, the children, the householders, the brahmacharis, the sannyasis. Everybody was pleased by him. And I only had the Srila Prabhupada with us for a few years, but they were incredibly wonderful years. Not everything was wonderful in ISKCON land. Don't let anybody fool you about the good old days. But what was wonderful was Srila Prabhupada. And you always felt if there was any problem, Srila Prabhupada was there to correct things and make things right. So as I said in the beginning, our love and our appreciation for Srila Prabhupada grows through the years. I think as we understand the philosophy more, as we I don't want to say advance, but as we continue in devotional service, we understand more and more deeply who Srila Prabhupada was and what he brought, and the tremendous gift he gave us in coming to America, starting this Krishna conscious movement, making us disciples, and then taking it all over the world, and then back to India, and helping the whole movement revive in India, where now it's doing tremendously. now the International Society for Krishna Consciousness is growing, by leaps and bounds in India. So Prabhupada was successful taking the movement outside and then brought it back. And now we have so many beautiful temples, so many thousands and thousands of devotees in our ISKCON society in India and all over the world. So anyway, I thank you all again for this opportunity. I feel very blessed and honored that you've asked me to speak. And I wish you all well to continue to serve this ISKCON society, associate with senior devotees, and always remember Bhakti True Maharaj within your hearts. And he will continue to guide you. Thank you all. Glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna.
So yes.
Sorry, Prabhuji. So thank you very much for your wonderful talk. We express our heartfelt gratitude to His Grace Tamohar Prabhu for giving his wonderful association and enlightening us. Prabhu very nicely explained so many things in just a very short time, so many Prabhupada pastimes as well. And he especially told that how His Holiness Bhaktichar Swami Guru Maharaj was an exceptional disciple, and Srila Prabhupada recognized, and Guru Maharaj proved it throughout his life by his wonderful services. One point you told about that, how he has many disciples, but he always considered himself as the disciple of Srila Prabhupada. So this was very a strong point. And like how Sadhu Sangh was his first priority, like during managements also, how he used to invite all his God brothers, and through serving prasadam, lot of teachings was there, not only just prasadam, but a lot of teachings were there. He was perfect in Gaudiya philosophy, perfect gentleman, Vaishnava etiquette, and he showed his devotion to Srila Prabhupada through this Abhacharan series that you recently watched. And you narrated various pastimes of Srila Prabhupada with specific qualities that Srila Prabhupada manifested. And how His Holiness Bhaktichar Swami Guru Maharaj gave the very prominent instructions that how we should not leave ISKCON and be in association of devotees always. And you narrated the pastime with your daughter, Srila Prabhupada pastime with your daughter. And you told that how this GBC GBC meeting at Ujjain was the best GBC meeting you had. So we humbly request your grace for visiting Ujjain and giving us opportunity to serve you sometime whenever the situation is favorable. And at the same time, we ask forgiveness for this session, like we could not able to start it on time. There was some technical issue, so it started a little late. So
it was minor.
So we beg for Prabhuji blessings to empower us so that we can follow the teachings and be a loyal servant of Srila Prabhupada, Guru Maharaj, and serve the mission. This mission is gone whole life. Thank you very much, Prabhuji, for your association. We express our heartfelt gratitude by chanting one time Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. All glories to Prabhupada.
His Grace Tamohar Prabhuji ki Jai, Jagat Krishna Prabhupada ki Jai. Gaur Premanande, Hari Hari Bol.